Hello, welcome to Light from Above. My name is David Kenny. I preach for the Church of Christ in Wadsworth, Ohio. We're honored to have some students from the West Virginia School of Preaching. And my guest next is Marcus Stenson. And I've known Marcus for several years. And Marcus, it's great to have you on the show. Glad you could be in. I've been looking forward to having you, because we've known each other, our families have known each other for a long time.
Quite a while.
And so glad you could be here with us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I have too, very much. Marcus, when you came to the West Virginia School of Preaching, obviously you came from Central Church of Christ in Martinsburg, where my dad preached for several years. And with the other students, I've been able to say something about either maybe from Andy, the director of the school, or the preacher where they were at. And my dad passed away a few years ago. But just right off the bat, just want to maybe mention a little bit about what it was like to grow up as, I've heard my dad all my life growing up, and it was a major impact to me. But what kind of impact would that be to you?
I'd have to say, looking back in retrospect, tremendous, for sure. My background is a little bit divided in that, I come from a home where my mom's a member of the church, and my dad is a religious man, but not. And so, kind of being pulled between those two tides, I consider myself very fortunate to have always been surrounded by good, faithful men, men that could show me the right way and what to stand for and the truth. And so, Warren, from as long as I can remember, when I was, this high with a little Afro puff running around causing havoc at Central up and down the hallways, was always the standard, always somebody that I could look to. And as I got older and started to understand what my place in all this was going to be, he was kind of that calm, grandfatherly voice over my shoulder, encouraging me. So I'm very grateful for him. Certainly some large shoes to fill. I hope that, wherever I end up going and whatever I'm able to do, that I can honor him in that. So he means a tremendous amount to me.
Well, I know that he would tell you the same thing he would tell other people to follow. You follow the Apostle Paul, but as he followed Christ.
Right.
So that's great. I talked to my mom just the other day about this. I'm getting ready to interview Marcus, and every time I mention your name, she's like, "Oh, I just love Marcus, and he's so great." And she has a great love for you and the family. I know my dad has adored your mother for a long time, and so it's a great relationship. It's a very good relationship. Now you decide to go to the West Virginia School of Preaching. You'd actually gone to Ohio Valley.
That's correct.
That's a Christian school. Studied computer science. You go, and I read through your resume you sent me. You did some work in industry, worked for a defense contractor or something like that. And then all of a sudden, you decide for whatever reason that you want to preach. Now, how did you, I know that my father had a lot of influence on you growing up, but still, as you mentioned, mother's a Christian, your father's not yet, hopefully someday. He'll make that decision whenever he wants. You have all these challenges going on. You have this secular education going on. And all of a sudden you decide that you want to go to the West Virginia School of Preaching. How did you get to that decision? What brought you to that kind of a decision?
It's a journey, that's for sure. It's kind of a crazy story. I've always been an ambitious person. And unfortunately my ambitions were not really focused to the benefit of all the tremendous amount of blessings that have always been around me and nudging me one way or another. Admittedly, I wanted to do things my way, and the things that were important to me early on snuffed out some of the good that I could have been doing. Some of those voices, like Warren and other men like Andy, who's the director at the school, and getting to know him over the summers, and always kind of redirecting me and letting me know that there was more to this life. And so coming out of college and being really blessed to have a really good job, and I would never smile in the face of that or try to detract from what it provided me with and what I learned there. But I think there are a lot of people that wake up every day and they go to a job and they get there and they're kind of just, so this is it. This is what I do every day. And this is what I have to do. Now I'm really stuck. And I was at that place in corporate America, living the cube life, just kind of empty. And, you know, I was serviceable at what I did. I was good at what I did, but I didn't feel like I was doing any good at it. And so really just having to deal with that on a daily basis, that'll burn you out. And something that I've been running from for quite a while, and having some folks tell me, you know, if you're not preaching, if you're not speaking, if you're not doing some good in some way, you're going to be wasting what God has given you. And having that in the back of my mind the whole time, and really having some excuses, a certain amount of, you know, financial debt that I accrued in school, allowed me to run from this for several years. But, you know, we have little faith. And so as God starts to really knock out one excuse after another, and I get a call from Andy one day and he says, why don't you come? And really having nowhere to turn outside of my own fear and my own stubbornness, that brought me to the school, and I'm really glad that I did.
Well, Andy's he's a major inspirational figure. He's not the first time I met him, I don't want to say I underestimated him or anything, but I didn't really know Andy the first time I saw him. I just knew that a lot of young people really looked up to him, and he just, you know, he really has that ability to be able to connect with young people. Even my, you know, when we go to like the Free Hardeman lectures, and my kids adore him. Yeah. And I mean, as soon as they see him, they're like, you know, they want to talk to him. He's asking my kids about, and you know, it's some people, they lose sight of the fact that preaching is a relationship business. It's about relationships. And you know, I spent some time in the cubicle land as well. I spent time, you know, sometimes, you know, work can be very fulfilling. Obviously, God gave us work. That's something that's His design, and it's beneficial. But like you said, sometimes it's like, you know, there's more than just a paycheck here. There's got to be more, and so I can really identify with what you're saying. You want to help people, and what's more important to help people than to show them, you know, the great rewards there are for being a Christian, and also the great punishments to be avoided. You know, a lot of times we talk about heaven, but we sort of forget about, you know, by the way, you know, if you don't want to be a Christian, it's your choice, but there's consequences. And so preachers really are warners. They warn people about that. And so it's, you know, I always find it interesting that, you know, sometimes people sort of look down at preachers. Maybe they don't respect it. But, you know, people that do that, I mean, they have to be really committed, don't they? I mean, they really have to have a commitment. I mean,
Right.
You do school, and the curriculum pretty challenging?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, in a good way. I don't know exactly what it is in my character that I've always felt like I do my best work when I'm pressed. So it takes a tremendous amount of self-discipline to get through the curriculum, and that's a good thing. Just to be transparent, when that hasn't been required of me in the past, I haven't always done as well as I could. But coming to a place after school was done, and being secure in my job and a career, and really making that commitment like you talk about, and making that decision, and taking the opportunity and valuing the chance to really sit at the feet of some men that I already held in very high regard and esteem, and ask the questions that I had to ask, and really dig in and sink in, was immensely attractive to me. And so the curriculum, though it is a challenge, we spend a lot of time in class every day and every week, and it certainly doesn't end there. We have reading and assignments, of course, that we're completing the rest of the time, is so beneficial to someone who really wants to dig in.
Now, they do a lot of hands-on experience as well, as my understanding. You'd also had to go preach, too.
Yeah.
Now, where are some of the places that you preached? Or, I mean, is it one congregation? Sometimes people work with one congregation.
Right.
But where are some of the places that you spoke as a student at the school?
I've been very lucky. I've had the opportunity to travel all over and speak. I've been many different places in Ohio, even some places not too far from here, but all over the Mid-Ohio Valley in West Virginia, even up into Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., and Virginia, Kentucky even. So I've had the opportunity to travel a great deal, and really get to rub shoulders with and meet and worship with and connect with saints all over the place. It's a blessing because you realize that you really do have family all over the country, and no matter where you go. And that's been an encouragement to me.
Well, the church is a lot bigger than people realize.
Absolutely.
And and I think a lot of, and not just numerically, just the whole concept of the church and family and brotherhood. And like you take a place in Northeast Ohio, the church isn't necessarily numerically strong, but in other places it is very strong. But you take a place like here in Ohio, people sometimes think the church is small and struggling, but it's not that way all the time. So being able to get out and see, I imagine, Central, the Church of Martinsburg, pretty good size.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of other congregations not very far away that are very small. And so I imagine, you grew up in Central, you go out to all these different places, and what did you run into? What kind of things do you run into that sort of impacted you? Good or bad? Even to me, even negative things could be positive things, depending on how you receive it. What are some things you run into?
I totally agree with that, both the good and the bad. And some places you go are an encouragement because you realize that this congregation, this group of God's family is alive and breathing and working. In some places you go, it's not like that. And not always necessarily the smaller congregations as opposed to the larger congregations. I think sometimes we make the assumption a lot of people are present here, so therefore they're thriving and things are good. Many times to the contrary. But some of the good things that you experience are just, a zeal in some places that you don't see everywhere. Sometimes when you walk into a congregation, you can almost feel it. There's an energy there, there's a love, there's a welcoming spirit there that is really making an impact on that community further outside the doors. And even the negative things, like you say, some places, being as comfortable as we are in America, it's natural to be complacent, to be apathetic, to be okay with checking the boxes, and I show up and punch my card 3 times a week and I've fulfilled my responsibility to this thing that we call Christianity. And that's a really dangerous place to be. And while that's a negative thing to encounter sometimes, I think it's also what drives me and lets me know that there's work to be done, and there's good work to be done.
Now, preaching is obviously, some people, they view preaching as rather light duty. But I heard you speak at Bucyrus one day lectureship, did an outstanding job. And I was very impressed, very pleased.
Thank you.
To hear you preach. But a lot of work goes into that.
Yeah.
Even what kind of preparation work do you do that anyone that will go to the school, maybe give somebody some insight on what does it take to prepare a lesson, and not just to prepare it on paper, but to prepare it to deliver. Well, what kind of, that's a big dynamic. A lot of people totally underestimate that. And what's been your experience with that?
My experience with that is, it's one of my favorite and one of the most difficult parts of preaching. I never want to deliver a message that I don't feel, that there isn't an emotional thread to. And sometimes when you're preparing a lot of different lessons, you can encounter that. But to prepare a lesson that I'm going to deliver on a Sunday or at a lectureship like we did, of course you're going to spend a lot of time in the text. One of the most important things that you can do is to spend enough time in the text that it's familiar enough to you that you can make it relevant. I think there's a difference between knowing the text and this is what it says, and being able to understand this is what it means to us today, and this is how I can convey that message. What is a good way for me to maybe use a metaphor or an analogy that hits home to us, and not something that's just really surface, but how does this make a difference for us today? How does this add value to somebody's life? How does this make us ask the right kind of questions? That's my challenge. That's where I spend a lot of time. There's a joke at the school, they jab at me and make fun of me sometimes for all of the metaphors that I use, and really trying to drill down and show a couple different layers to each concept if I can. And that's something that I work on a lot.
Now, when you went to school, obviously you saw my dad preach. I imagine he made it look easy.
He did.
And, being his son, I could tell you, several books, several hours, lifetime of study, those kinds of things. When you went to the school, what did you find maybe some of the more surprising things you weren't expecting when you went to the preaching school? I mean, it's one thing that the preaching concept is one thing, but what were some of the things that surprised you when you went to the school and started getting into the program?
I think one of the things that surprised me, and maybe due to my own ignorance, I came with the intention to, there's some things that I'm interested in that I want to find out more about, and here's some topics that I really want to dig into, and I'm going to go and I'm going to study really hard, and I'm going to soak up all I can from these men that I love and respect, and have my questions answered, and when I leave, I'll be ready to go. But in the course of much study, you will find that you will create more questions than you do answers. And so one of the things that has really surprised me is how that dynamic has kind of evolved for me. And now I have different questions, deeper questions, and I really, look forward to the time that I can sink my teeth into those. So it surprised me a little bit, on that front, in a good way, but just a humbling experience to understand and live in an environment where you are keenly aware every day that you're never going to arrive. Mm-hmm. You're never going to have this all figured out. You're never going to get to a place where you have all the answers. And observing the humility of some of my instructors sometimes when we get into these conversations to say, that's something that I need to study out, or let's take some time and study this on the side, or even, those dreadful words, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing to say.
Especially, when you come to a place where you're a gospel preacher now, you're a minister, this is what you do, this is a profession, you're supposed to know all the answers. So, being willing to be humble and admit, I don't know everything. A surprising but very valuable lesson that I've learned.
Now, let me ask you this question, or make this statement. Tell me if you find this to be valid or not. I tell people that if your Christian walk, your Christian study is only what you receive at a Bible class, or even if you sit and hear a good preacher your whole life, if you only do that, you're only getting a survey level. And if you don't dig, if you don't do your own research and your own asking those questions and finding the answer to those questions, and like you said, question upon question, if you spend all your time at the survey level study, you're going to have a survey level of faith. Now, you obviously, you grew up in the Central Church, you had good instruction and all that. Have you found that, hey, you know what, the Word of God is far deeper and there's a lot more breadth here than I ever even imagined?
I think absolutely. And in every instance, it doesn't wear out. We are organic beings, and we're constantly changing, and our perceptions are constantly changing. And our understanding is constantly changing. And the Word is dynamic in that every time you come to it, if the mold of your character is different, it's going to slice a different way and hit a different angle. That's why it's dangerous to a lot of people too. And to some extent, I think we operate between these two tensions of what we believe and hold dear and the questions that we have. And sometimes we allow that to stop us from asking the questions. And I think that's a dangerous place to be, and kind of what you're hitting on. Be willing to ask the questions, but be willing to backfill it with the necessary study to answer them. We live in a society where if someone raises a question, then that's the end of the argument. If we can ask a question, then it totally invalidates what's going on here. That's not the case. It's not the essence of truth. I would like to think that hopefully in my work and endeavors that I can help to kind of engender or foster that kind of an attitude that it's okay to ask the question, but we have to be willing to follow it where it leads.
Now, what are you're getting ready to graduate here, your graduation ceremony June 12th, and they asked me to come, Andy asked me to come and speak, obviously. He told me this is the honor that they really wanted my father to have, and because of you. So I'm honored to be able to go and to speak, and I have my own thoughts about that, which is going to be challenging to do. But what do you, when school's over, and that's coming, what's next? What do you envision you're going to do next? What's your plan? What's your horizon look like to you?
I wish I could tell you that there was something concrete in place already, but there isn't, and that's okay. That's a totally different mindset than I had, 2 years ago when I left what I thought was stable. So it might seem crazy now, but ideally, I'll probably be working some with Martinsburg this summer, which I greatly look forward to. I always love going back home, and it's a little strange because they do remember me when you remember me being this tall, and that's always kind of surreal. But that'll be a tremendous honor, and from there, I'll be getting married in August, so life changes a great deal on that front. And after that, would just really like to get involved someplace where I can do a lot of good in the trenches, so to speak. And I'm sure that'll involve being in the pulpit at times or regularly. But I really want to connect with people, and I want to provoke some questions. And I think it's time that we start having some discussions that have laid dormant for a while on a societal level. And I look forward to that.
Now you mentioned societal level,
Yeah.
and obviously, it's no secret our country's being ripped apart. I mean, the fabric of our country is being torn in so many different ways. I mean, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's politically, whether there's whether it's age differences, gender differences. Obviously, we have a large vocal, they're more vocal than large segment of our society that's trying to, put upon society things that were not considered normal. They're trying to normalize. What is our nation has gone on for so long, and we would be able to say, united we stand, divided we fall. But we were united on a lot of different things. But going forward as a country, what is that united force that's going to help our country, do you think? Is it going to be a political leader? I mean, what is it? What's going to hold the fabric of our country together?
I wish there was an easy answer to that question.
It's a hard one.
And I don't think that there is, and I think that's what scares a lot of people when we really start to look at it. There was a time when you could look and say, well, the moral fabric of this country is God-centered. We have the same moral fabric. But as that has kind of shifted away, where do we really stand? Do we really, truly want to stand in a society where the standard is relativity? And what's true for me is true for me, and what's true for you is true for you. Where does that put us? And what is the ultimate end of those things? I don't think it's a good place. That being said, that's why, our current situation as the church in the United States is so challenging. Certainly scary for some, but exciting for others, because the further the natural population drifts from that moral fabric, the more the great things about Christianity and that way of life are going to stand out in a society that no longer is looking out for the next man, that is totally selfish in every pursuit. I think it will provide us with a tremendous amount of opportunity to really make some meaningful impacts and leave people asking the question, why? But in order for that to happen, we have to be looking for those opportunities too.
Just so questions are going to be important.
Yeah.
People are going to be asking, to me, when people ask questions, that shows opportunity.
Yeah.
And you're right. I mean, a lot of it's going to be, people are going to have to ask some serious questions. They just assumed. They just gone through a foundation. We've always been this way. So, to me, one of the things that's important is, apologetics, for one.
Absolutely.
Why do you believe what you believe? Well, why do you do that? Why do you think this way? And people are going to be asking those questions, and they have huge ramifications. So, Marcus, thanks for coming in. It's always
Thank you.
a blessing to see you. Thanks for being on the program.
Thanks.
Before we close our program today, we'd like to take a moment and review this roadmap to heaven with you, since the matter is so serious. There are many incorrect set of directions out there, and sadly, so many people are following them. For example, some people have been given wrong turns. They believe things such as faith only, works only, or grace only. Or some attempt to change the order of the turns, being baptized before they even believe. Some people fail to realize what point they are on the map. Don't even open their Bibles yet, and they think they're saved already. As a person travels in a car or takes a hike, it has to follow the proper directions, so we must follow the proper directions to heaven. Let's take a look at the directions on our roadmap to heaven here. You have to look at these passages in your Bible for yourself. We'll just list the steps, the turns on the way. First is to believe or to have faith. And then number 2, to repent, to turn away from sin. Number 3 is to confess that Jesus is the Son of God. Number 4 is immersion, or to be baptized, which is a burial in water to have your sins washed away. And then you're added to the church by the Lord, not by a group of people, or not by giving some kind of testimonial experience or things like that. And then once you're added, you need to serve and worship the Lord faithfully all the days of your life. And the key word's faithfully. You don't waver. And that's very important. We need to keep in mind, too, that in Noah's day there was a big flood, and only people in the ark were saved from the flood. The same is true today. There is no salvation outside the Lord's church. Where are you on the roadmap to heaven? Thanks for watching our program. Please let us know if we can assist you with further information for your journey.
Soon